Hi everyone, welcome to the Tortoise Open News meeting this week. I am Liz, I'm an editor at Tortoise, as you know, and thank you very much for being here. I hope you've enjoyed a long, sunny bank holiday weekend. I definitely did. We've got quite a packed agenda of things that we would like to talk about today. If there are particular things that you want to bring up, responses to stuff we've done, stories you think we've missed, things that are worth a revisit, then as always, please do put your hand up or stick them in the chat. We've got a very small bijou gathering of tortoises here in the newsroom today, but lots and lots of people joining from home. So hopefully you can hear us and we will be able to see you on the screens around the place. I hope you've had a chance to listen to the Slow newscast story this week, another Matt d'Ancona Inside Downing Street special, and that actually is where I'm going to start today, to sort of hear from Matt, a kind of idiot's guide a little bit. We've looked at a marriage, we've looked at Munira and Dougie, we've talked about the influence that they have inside of Number 10, and I wonder if Matt might sort of paraphrase a little bit what he thinks the kind of point is that he's landing in this story and the things that he discovered. Hello, Matt.
Hey, hi, Chris. Well, if you're looking for an idiot's guide, always go and ask an idiot. So here I am. Well, it's an interesting audio story this week because it concerns two people that, unless you're a kind of politics obsessive, you probably haven't heard of. One is Munira Mirza, who's the head of the policy unit in Number 10, and her husband, Dougie Smith, who's been an operator in the Tory party for a very long time, and he kind of runs the candidates list for elections, and he has a big hand in who gets what in the handing out of choice public appointments in institutions and things like that. So they wield a lot of power. The interesting thing about them is that they came from totally different parts of the spectrum. Munira Mirza used to be in the Revolutionary Communist Party, which kind of broke up into all sorts of weird factions and elements, mostly libertarian. And her husband, Dougie, is someone who became notorious in the Federation of Conservative Students in the 80s, which was so, again, libertarian, so right-wing, that Norman Tebbit abolished it. So that's a measure of you know how fringe a figure he was. But he managed to survive in the Tory party, and post-Brexit, he's really come into his own, but very much in the shadows, doesn't like to be photographed, seen, shies away from publicity. Why does any of this matter? Well, it matters because Munira Mirza is extremely close to Boris Johnson. She was described to me by at least one of her colleagues as Boris Johnson's muse. She was with him in City Hall, and although her formal role is to devise policy, she's actually become the kind of designer, if you like, of this attack on so-called wokeness that is really important to the Johnson government, and will be even more important after the vaccination rollout is complete, because what they are conscious of in Number 10 is that we'll all start losing our vaccine euphoria and looking around and surveying an economic landscape that's pretty rough. And so they want to really get into the culture war game. They already have, with the rows about statues, flags, Churchill, but they're going to keep that going. And this is where her husband, Dougie Smith, comes in, because he is someone who's intimately involved in who gets what job in museums, art galleries, and so on. And there are a number of very important appointments coming up. We've seen some of the controversies over the appointments at the BBC and elsewhere, Ofcom. Altogether, if you add all this up, what you see is a government that is trying to encourage and stoke up a culture war because it thinks it will win it, and B, trying to build up a kind of, if you like, what in the Soviet Union used to be called a nomenklatura, you know, a whole class of people in very senior positions, both obviously in parliament and government, but also in public institutions, who are pro-Boris, pro-Brexit, populist, looking forward to what they now think can be an even bigger Commons majority in the next election. So it's a way of approaching the whole strategy of the government through, if you like, the lens of looking at a married couple who are, in contrast to Boris and Carrie, who got married over the weekend, very little known.
Matt, why does it matter that it's them?
I mean, these particular people, or
the particular people. Why does it matter that it is Munira and Dougie that are the sort of, where you describe her as the software designer and he sort of plugs it in kind of thing?
I think they're both. I mean, I think the interesting thing about both of them is that, I mean, I came across Dougie as an activist. He was notionally a conservative, but then he went into a party many people may not even have heard of, the Referendum Party, which was founded by the late billionaire Sir James Goldsmith in the 90s, with what was then the very bonkers idea of having a referendum on leaving the EU. And this, it made a bit of fuss and caused a few bits of plaster to fall off the ceiling, but it was seen as very much a kind of rich man's game. Just something for him to have a bit of fun at the expense of the Tories, which he did. And so it's kind of, Dougie Smith was very much an outsider. What he managed to do, though, was has great political stamina. He got a job as a speechwriter under David Cameron. He was always there or thereabouts, but never really at the centre. And I think that the reason they matter is that Brexit changed everything. That suddenly this becomes a political world where outsiders are very much welcomed into the centre. That the difference between the fringe and the centre starts to blur a bit. So Munira Mirza, she's a fascinating person. I mean, she's a child of two Pakistani immigrants, both of whom working class, grew up in Oldham, had plenty of experience of horrific racism herself, but drew very different conclusions to what she calls, the grievance industry of today. She thinks there isn't such a thing as institutional racism, that the whole kind of social justice agenda really masks more socioeconomic problems, which can be addressed by the government's levelling up agenda. She's a very interesting person, and she's very clever, very civil, and she's someone who's kind of brought to the mainstream of government ideas that used to be sort of looked upon as slightly suspect, slightly skinhead, slightly football terrorist. So that it's a story really of how the fringe moved to the centre and has grabbed power, and politics, yet another example of the way in which the practice of politics has changed and the personnel of politics has changed. We've obsessed over Dominic Cummings during his time as Johnson's most senior advisor, and latterly in his kind of revenge campaign. But he wasn't the only one. There are lots of people around Johnson, or have been, and there'll be more, who don't necessarily come from the conventional background. And it's an interesting study in how you get to the top in the new world.
Yeah, there's tons of detail in it. I only listened to it this morning, so I'm still processing what to make of it. If James Harding's here, you were chatting about it on our team call we had at 8:30 this morning, James. You've reflected on what it tells us about the culture wars too, haven't you?
So I'm the least reliable narrator of Matt's stories, because I thought this was brilliant, and it was really. I was really a bit destabilized by it, Matt. So enough talking about them, let's talk about us. My issue with it was this. As you know, when you started in on this project, I was really interested in Dougie Smith. I'm really interested in the backroom man. If you are a want-to-be conservative candidate, keeping Dougie Smith on side, it seems is critical. You hear and in fact, you give some examples of seats where he got in the way, and people who thought they were about to become MPs found out they weren't. And he also talked about the fact that he has real influence over who gets appointed to these public bodies, the big arguments over culture. But And I suppose that is one of the things. You're always going to find someone like that exists within that Downing Street, Conservative Party operation. The thing that you wrote about Munira Mirza, I found really significant, because I suppose on the morning after the local elections, there was a great moment on the Today programme where or it wasn't on the morning, sorry, it was in the afternoon. Evan Davis was saying the problem with the media is you don't really understand Boris Johnson, right? And you don't get why Boris Johnson wins. And in particular, I think on this subject of social justice, right? I think the media really struggles to say, well, hang on a second, we've got evidence here of racism. We've got evidence here of sexism. Surely there's one side, there's an obvious side to this argument, and yet why is it that the right is doing better on this than the left? And the description you had, that you just spoke about there, of Munira Mirza saying, look, I have problems with the grievance industry. I don't buy the argument of institutional racism. I'd rather focus on malicious racists. I have a problem with critical race theory as a vehicle for power plays, attempts to control people. And I personally have experienced racism, but my father's experience in Oldham was of white colleagues being generous and good. All of that made me pause and think, Matt, oh yes, I can see how that argument, and we reach for it in Tortoise in the newsroom, we've often talked about systemic racism or institutional racism. And in the process, what you do is you traduce the integrity of lots of white people who think they might be on side, or lots of men who think they might be on side, and make them feel as though they're part of the problem. Whereas what Munira Mirza is doing for Boris Johnson is saying, no, you can be friends in this cause. We're not necessarily saying you're a malicious participant in it. And that made me really think about the thing that Tony Blair wrote a few weeks ago, which is what does the Labour Party do? What do progressives do about a subject that they think is theirs, social justice, but they're losing on? And I didn't know whether, kind of, now you've had a chance to breathe on the end of this, because we talked about it, the take that we worked on the other day around the criminal justice system is all around this. So I just wondered whether you've got thoughts about how do you, if you're a progressive, engage with the argument that Munira Mirza is making, and not just dismiss it as a front for, if you like, Tories to run a war on woke, not just kind of political correctness gone mad, kind of reactionary politics, but a coherent argument about the way in which you do engage with social justice without alienating the majority of the population.
It's a really, well, it's the question in a way, which is, how do you stop people ruining a good idea? Which is that at the heart of the whole, what Munira Mirza calls the grievance industry, is a really important idea, which is that prejudice is not just confined to bad actors, bad individuals. It's actually it's etched into institutions and systems and structures. And this has really been quite a commonplace idea since the Macpherson inquiry into Stephen Lawrence's murder, which was the first time that institutional racism was used in such a document. That was 1999. But what's happened is that elite London has kind of swallowed critical race theory and the notion of white privilege in one massive gulp. And this has fanned out into a huge industry of unconscious bias training, quotas, and so on. And what the Munira Mirza, Dougie Smith axis that we're counting on is this promoting a massive backlash. And the intellectual response should be, look, you're wrong, actually. There is such a thing as institutional racism, but you're right that just telling people that is so and finger wagging at them and declaring them to be, whether they know it or not, racist is a bad strategy. And the way to get these ideas across is by definition has to be much more subtle, because you're telling second generation unemployed person in Wigan, that he's full of white privilege, that's unlikely to get you very far. The difficulty is how you explain to people who are themselves already, disenfranchised, feel that they have themselves been left behind, that they nonetheless live in a complicated society where there are all sorts of ways of being held back, and that you are attending to their needs as well as those of the minorities you're discussing. Of course, that's, progressives always believe that shouting that the argument is over, or you're on the right side of history, or it's just a generational thing, you don't understand it because you're over 32. This is not a good strategy. And if in as much as wokeness exists, its worst characteristic is a kind of smug certainty and a preference for the performative over the practical. And I think that what we really need to do is zero in zealously upon the detail, the practical, the educational, and not try and play into that kind of what James O'Brien calls the footballification of policy, which is where what the Tories want, what this particular power couple want, is totally for social justice warriors to come out shouting, there are racists in number 10. That's the perfect response from their point of view. The right response is to look at the detail and say, well, actually, how do you get across ideas like institutional racism to people who might not find the idea immediately comprehensible, plausible, or feasible? And then actually, if you walk people through the statistics, the reality, the lived experience of people, it's not a hard sell. It's all about the way in which you explain it to people and the manner in which you do it. And Blair is right that if you lead with a punch, you can't expect people to say thank you.
Matt, thank you very much for that. My colleague Gajinder is sitting here on the sofa in front of me and waving at me. Go on, Goj, what do you think about this?
Sure. Well, I think if you look at the progressives that have won, like Obama or Clinton or Blair or Macron, they haven't led on the culture war battle. I think that's something progressives will probably lose. I think if we focus on jobs, upskilling, having a better NHS, that all leads to tackling inequalities, and as part of a wider package, it's a lot easier to tackle institutional racism and other forms of racism. I find trying to claim that everyone is racist is not a kind of election-winning way.
Yeah, like Matt says, telling people off is not a great vote-winning strategy, I guess.
A positive message like things can get better in 1997. I think if you have a positive vision for the country, it's a lot easier.
Yeah. Louise Jarvis making a point in the chat on this. Are you there, Louise?
Hi, yes.
Hiya. What do you think about all this?
Yeah, well, I mean, as I said, I think I just basically just said what Matt was already and James was saying anyway. I think it's just this thing of like, what do we actually mean by institutional racism? And I think some people don't know what it means. Lots of people think it means different things to everyone else. And hence it becomes into this big shouting match, as a lot of politics is, of like, there is institutional racism, there isn't, with actually grappling with what it is. Because then once you've got a handle on what it is, then you can start to be working of like, well, how do we deal with it? And what was just being said of like, actually what we're looking for, the positives of how do we come out of this, really. We're just stuck into the you're bad, you're good, black and white stuff, whereas actually, as was just said, it's like, actually no, we need to be looking at, okay, how do we move forward, because we're just stuck in the argument at the moment.
Yeah, it does feel that way, doesn't it? We'll do one more comment on this before we sort of move on within the culture war space to the next topic I wanted to talk about, which is Stonewall. Yelena, do you want to just wrap up on this particular one for now? We will come back to it, of course. Are you there, Yelena?
Hello?
Hello.
Hello. I don't know if you can see me. There we go.
We can see you. Oh, there you are. Hiya.
Hello. No, my point was just that the Tories have always taken part in this interplay between co-opting progressive politics quite aggressively and being very vocal about that in some respects, and then on the other hand, really stoking the culture wars in quite a, well, in a very non-progressive manner. So I suppose it's between balancing those, and I think that the average Tory voter, just as much as the average Labour voter, is actually much more instrumentally driven. I think when we talk about the collapse of the Red Wall in the north, I think that's much more driven by, when we talk about like the Ben Houchen effect, the fact that people are voting on the basis of seeing material gains in their local area, and for some reason, or for whatever reason, connecting that with voting Conservative, rather than it being more ideologically driven, as we might consider it here.
Yeah, I think you're right. And we should come back to this. We've been weighing up and sort of churning over, actually, a way to talk about, in part, the sort of electability or otherwise of the left, which doesn't just mean the Labour Party, but all the other progressive parties, the sort of how what Matt was talking about and what Gajinder mentioned too, we could sort of envisage, or whether we could envisage a sort of synthesis of something that talks to all of those fronts, if you like, that is a potent and simple counter message to the war on woke. I suppose my nervousness about, to take Matt's example of make the case, explain what institutional racism is and make the case, it's not a difficult case to make, but it does require engaged brain, listen to detail, and it's much easier to make people cross about a statue being graffitied on than to do that. So we will continue to sort of churn that over in the washing machine of editorial and podcast ideas. I did want to talk today about another what do I call it, frontier in the culture wars? I don't know, a flavour, a slice. I'm not sure what the unit of measure is of culture war, but there's been some stuff in the news over the bank holiday weekend and just before it, actually, to do with Stonewall that I've been particularly interested in. It feels like the sort of next, I'm not going to say the end game, but it does feel like the next sort of iteration of the trans rights, LGB sort of disintegration, if you like, of the LGBT umbrella, if it ever was that. And Mark, my colleague Mark, is here. Just can you give us a sort of what's gone on for people who've missed it?
Sure. So it's a little bit of a mess. But so there was a situation a while ago where a university deplatformed a professor, and because there were accusations that this professor was a transphobe, and then there was a big inquiry, big report into it, and that report was published saying that Stonewall was misrepresenting equality law in its diversity championship guidance.
This was Exeter University.
Exeter.
Yeah.
Yes.
Essex, Exeter. I think Exeter. Yeah.
And Diversity Champions is a scheme that Stonewall runs, which lots of universities, I think pretty much most of them, lots of government departments and lots of organisations pay money to be a member of. And if you're a member, they get training and support and advice on how to do things like create inclusive cultures, various bits of kind of procedural advice with recruitment and that sort of thing. But a legal professional came out and said they're misrepresenting the Equality Act. So that was the first thing that happened. The university pulled out of the scheme or announced that they weren't going to renew their relationship. Shortly after that, the EHRC, the Equality rights body, they announced that they were withdrawing from the scheme, and then over the weekend ACAS, the conciliatory service, announced that they were also withdrawing from the scheme. Nancy Kelly appeared on... She's
the CEO of Stonewall.
She's the current CEO
quite
of Stonewall.
new.
Yep, she took over June
last year.
And she is largely the person who is sort of identified as sort of taking Stonewall into the gender space, away from pure sexual orientation kind of issues, which is what Stonewall was originally about. Nancy Kelly's appeared on TV to defend kind of Stonewall's
position.
And she said, first of all, that she's very comfortable with like where Stonewall is, the direction it's going. She invoked anti-Semitism as an equivalent to transphobia, which got a lot of people sort of quite exercised and angry. She's also responding to Liz Truss's directive now, which Liz Truss would like all government departments to think really hard whether or not they should continue to be members of the equality scheme. And
to be the diversity champions, to have
part
that
of
badge on your website or whatever. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
And it throws up a couple of things. So I guess the bigger question it throws up is what happens when you have an organisation that's been focused on a single issue for quite a long time. So when it was formed in '89, it was specifically to repeal Section 28 and achieve lots of other areas of equality for lesbian and gay men. And it's achieved a lot of those things. Over the past 30 years, it's had a laser focus, and it was instrumental in things like the Equality Act, civil partnerships, gay marriage, the repeal of 28 in 2003. It's done a lot of that. So what happens to a campaign group when a lot of the kind of legwork has been done? Where do you go from there? And it's logical, it's a completely logical decision to think, well, we represent the LGBT community. Where are the other areas of discrimination or the other areas of inequality? Obviously, the transgender area is, there's a lot going on there. So there's a lot of attention focused on that. This means you have a lot of gay men and lesbians and bisexual people who now no longer feel represented by the organisation, which for the past 30 years has been the go-to campaign group. And when those lesbians and gay men say, actually, we're not sure Stonewall stands for us very much anymore, we might go and do something else, that is greeted with criticisms or accusations of transphobia, oh, you're setting up hate groups, and yeah, it's just become quite messy.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot going on in there, isn't there? Because there's the question of whether, the simple question of whether there's any need for a campaigning and rights organisation for lesbians, gays and bisexual people on the one hand. There's the question of whether Stonewall was the created specific organisation to do that. And Matthew Paris in the Times he was one of the founding members of Stonewall last weekend, I think it was, saying the transgender rights challenge is nothing to do with us. By us, he means the LGB of the group.
Simon Fanshawe did as well. He was another founder member. He's come out to
that whether this is a sort of strategic misstep, not saying it's not important, but just it's not Stonewall's job to do it. There's that part of it too. And then there's a part of it which is, as Matt's just been mentioning, what she said on the BBC was to make gender critical feminism equivalent to anti-Semitism, which is a sort of another step again, and the sort of the division within a community, if you can call it that, to say, well, if you hold these views, that makes you anti, you're not part of it, which is more problematic, again, notwithstanding how offensive it is to Jewish people.
Exactly. And then there was also this bizarre moment where, because of all the stuff, the Essex report with Liz Truss, the HRC, all of this business, there's been a lot of media coverage just about Stonewall. And then a few days before the weekend, the Stonewall official Twitter account posted this message going, oh, hi, Sunday Times, Telegraph, Sun. You okay, hun? You're talking a lot about this, and it's a bit weird.
Oh, yeah.
And it just kind of displayed a kind of arrogance to sort of, how dare you even criticise who we are and what we do. So there is a general kind of disquiet amongst, I guess, certainly my peer group, and there is a generational element to it, definitely. But there is a disquiet where it's like, don't really understand what it's trying to do, don't really understand what it stands for anymore. It's Pride Month coming up, or it would have been, had everything sort of, had the dates sort of hadn't been affected by COVID. 25 years ago, Pride was an angry political event. It was a protest. And now it's a celebration and an awareness raising thing. Stonewall, where does it sit in that now? So yeah, there is something I think interesting about what happens in the sort of planned obsolescence of a campaign group, and would it be better just to close its doors or rebrand itself specifically as a transgender and trans rights
if that's the new battle that's more important to fight, potentially.
And we're working on this thinking idea, and the working title for it is, are gay people better off without Stonewall? And if you look at the division and the arguments it's caused within groups of friends, if that's the way you want to go, I can make a really strong case for yes, they would be.
Yeah, interesting. Alex iPhone, I'm sorry, I don't know your surname, Alex. I'm guessing it is an iPhone, but you making some comments about this too. Are you there?
Hi. Yeah, I'm not on video though, or I don't think I am. Am I?
That's all right. I can't see you, but I can hear you. So let's go with that.
Hi. Yeah, what's the question?
Well, I just wondered what you make of this, whether you think Stonewall has sort of outlived its usefulness as an organisation, whether you think this is a blip. What's your take on it?
Oh, this is so fraught, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, but the comment I made in chat is that, you know, the LGBT community is huge. It's very diverse culturally, politically, in demographics, you know, just as much as wider society is. And it's just almost crazy that Stonewall for so long have been the sole voice in terms of the engagement partner for government. So often it's the body that's consulted and involved in policy forming, and there have been no other voices, and that seems strange. It feels strange that Stonewall's had a monopoly, particularly in the corporate world, where the list of partners that pay Stonewall to be members of their schemes is absolutely enormous. There's hardly a company that isn't on there. And it feels really, really odd. It seems to me inevitable that sooner or later there would be voices that said, actually, we don't want one organisation speaking for us. There are subdivisions of opinion within the community that we need alternative representation. And I get why it's difficult for Stonewall to accept that, because they're sort of turkey voting for Christmas, I suppose, if they sort of accept that. But I think it is time. It's inevitable, but it's time.
Alex, do you know how much it costs by any chance to be a diversity champion? If I'm an organisation, I want to be one. Do you know how much I have to pay?
It's several thousand.
Okay.
I know I'm not talking on behalf of my organisation here, but my personal capacity. I did want to ask my own organisation, which is a member of Stonewall. It's listed anyway as being a member of Stonewall on some sort of website. But my understanding is several thousand pounds. And I think there's different levels of membership as well. You can ask Stonewall to do certain things for you as extra service, if you like. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much,
no worries.
Alex. I think James Harding, you had a thought or a question on this as well before we.
I both thought of a question. The one thought is just complexity. Actually, you know, when you hear this debate, it gets polarized really fast, and obviously it's complicated, and that makes it, I think, sort of interesting for us. And my question is, what do you think, Liz?
So instinctively, I don't feel great about the idea of a world without Stonewall in it. I don't buy Mark's sort of feeling that maybe the main battles have been fought and won, and it's cool, everybody can relax in terms of ending discrimination against people. I don't think the job is done from that perspective. I don't feel comfortable with the idea, because I think this is how, you know, oppressive power works, is dividing people and setting them against one another in order that everybody is weaker and weakened. And I don't necessarily like the idea of sort of, you know, several smaller and more specialist, you know, campaigning organisations. I'm not sure they would be greater than the sum of their parts. I'm not sure. But I do think it is the case that, you know, organisations, when they become very powerful, when they become very involved in a sort of monetisation of a campaigning message, can get it wrong and can stop listening to their full community. I am sort of persuaded by some of the analysis that's been done on Stonewall materials over the past decade, that the sort of particularly, you know, lesbians have become less visible and less an important part of the messaging and the argument. So that I am persuaded by some of those bits of analysis that have been done. I think that it will be really, really difficult for Stonewall to get back from the position in which it finds itself. I do think that is the case. Like Mark mentioned, a rebrand. I think it's going to take more than a rebrand to get people feeling comfortable with it.
Yeah, so much of it is.
I mean, well, there is an easy way for them to do it, because a lot of this is attached to Nancy Kelly, So she is deemed to be the figurehead.
But the consultation was done by her predecessor.
Yeah, but because she's the one coming out saying, I have no, like, she's very much sort of put herself as an individual, I think, front and centre of it. So it would be easier for them to fix. I mean, I think as well, the Diversity Champion scheme started in 2001. It's been around for quite a long time. And a lot of the things now that it encourages and advises and educates employers on are law now. So is it just a vanity badge thing that you're buying? In which case, you know, you don't need to be a Stonewall Diversity Champion. You can fly your rainbow flag and you can do your diversity days and you can do all of that. So it does sort of smack a little bit of a protection racket, a little bit. And if you read, and some of the emails have been leaked to people about, you know, to organisations where they're trying to get people to sign up again, and it is a sales machine.
Yeah.
So you have to question the motives.
There's one point of detail on this that I am interested in and concerned about, which is that in this space, and in this space, I might say the women's sector, certain organisations that campaign for ending race discrimination, lots of organisations that have a charitable and political MO. The people that are appointed to lead those organisations are increasingly putting themselves, their personal selves, at risk. And that is a concern, I think. It's increasingly difficult to find people who are going to step into the kind of hornet's nest. And to be fair, the Stonewall CEO knew what she was taking on when she took that job and had to sort of be very brave, I think, to say, well, I am going to do it. This is what I believe. And, you know, and I think that is increasingly difficult to fill those roles with people who are, you know, like I say, putting themselves personally at risk by taking on the brief. I might come to now that I know there's somebody in the room called Anthony Hadley who runs comms for an organisation who's a partner of ours here at Tortoise, the Social Mobility Foundation. Are you there, Anthony?
I'm here, yes.
Hello, nice to see you.
Likewise.
Thank you for being here. Anthony, your organisation, the Social Mobility Foundation, is one of our network partners. We have 500 or so, I think, of people who you have introduced to Tortoise, who come and participate in think-ins and what have you. And you came along today to share with us some research and things that you've done with some of your young. Just tell us a couple of sentences on who you are and what you do and the organisation, and then what you found in this research.
Absolutely. So the Social Mobility Foundation has 3 pillars to its work. The first of those pillars is a programme. We work with high-achieving students from low-income backgrounds, and we try and give those students the opportunities that they would get if they were better off. So the conversations and the mentoring to help them get into the universities they want, and then into the top professions that they want as well. That program is called the Aspiring Professionals Program, and we partner with business to provide those opportunities. Some of them are very tangible in the form of placements, grad schemes, etc. And then we have lots of mentoring opportunities as well. The second pillar is what we call the Social Mobility Employer Index. So we've just been talking about a kind of business-led index there in the context of Stonewall. Ours is an index that's free to enter, and we rank firms on how they approach social mobility, and we encourage them to take more action in that space and hire more people from low-income backgrounds. And then the third pillar of what we do is called the Department for Opportunities. And that's the newest part of our work, and it's our campaigning and advocacy arm. And we run campaigns on kind of single issues. So earlier this year, we ran a campaign to end laptop poverty, recognising the fact that DFE rollout of laptops was very patchy, and a lot of students from disadvantaged backgrounds had been completely cut off from their education due to lockdown. So that's the Department for Opportunities, which we call DO for short. So if I talk about DO, that's what I'm talking about. And yeah, we've just done a survey. We surveyed Social Mobility Foundation students. So again, these are students who are very bright, but are from less well-off backgrounds. And we had 1,500 respondents. So we're delighted with the response. I should say the findings are under embargo, so please don't share them outside this meeting for now. Let me start with exams. We're really, really worried about summer assessments, as it's formally called. But what we found in the data is that most students are actually sitting a normal course of summer exams. And that's going to be how their grades are calculated. Most people on the call will know we have centre assessed grades at the moment. So teachers are deciding. It's not an algorithm. It's not the exam board. It's teachers who make the decision. And even though the guidance states that exams shouldn't be the only way the grades are calculated, what we see in our survey is that we have that situation. And that's worrying on two counts. The first is that disadvantaged students are more likely to have missed out on their education for a few different reasons, maybe access to tech. COVID rates might have been higher in their area, so they miss more school. And also we know from Ofqual there is a bias. There is a bias that's been shown in studies where disadvantaged young people don't get the grades that they deserve when being marked by individual teachers. So we're really, really worried about that. And we know that our students are too. They're really worried about actually getting to university, and then when they're there feeling fully prepared for that experience.
And Anthony, were you specifically asking about the sort of exam anxiety as opposed to other types of anxiety that have transpired as a consequence of COVID? Was it specifically about the kind of next stage of your life stuff in the survey?
We looked at the whole picture, really. I mean, I'm happy to kind of to try and do this live and dig out some specific things. But on exams, let me just say 43% of the students we spoke to aren't confident that the current system is going to give them the grades they deserve. So obviously that's a massive worry for us. And even though we know this bias exists from Ofqual, we know that schools shouldn't be running this system. They are anyway. And, we just don't see media talking about this. We don't see a plan from government to safeguard against that bias, to reassure these students. And of course, the knock-on effect of that is a big load of anxiety and other mental health problems, which we asked about in the same survey.
What do you think about, you might not have this information from the survey because it's only just happened, what do you think about lengthening the school day?
Yeah, well, that's a big story today, isn't it? And we know that actually when we presented students with a list of things that they want to see to help them catch up on their learning. And that's not what our students want to see. Actually, a big priority for them is work experience, and particularly in-person work experience. So again, we have to remember these students are high achieving, so they are bright and tend to do well at school. So I can't speak for all disadvantaged students, but these students in particular feel that they've really missed out from that in-person experience, the stuff that you can't get from a virtual placement. And absolute kudos to the businesses that have persisted and innovated and run these schemes. But yeah, our students have a heap load of anxiety that once they get to uni and they're more tied up with academic work, they're not going to have those in-person opportunities that prepare them for the world of work.
Yeah, interesting. I've just seen a note from Andrew Girdwood actually in the chat, who's a real regular on Tortoise Thinking, saying I wish there was a LinkedIn for talented students, young people who come from disadvantaged backgrounds, because they're hard to find. You're kind of looking for a needle in a haystack. And I know that there's a sort of a bit of a systemic issue, which is how do you present yourself and how do you market yourself and all the rest of that. But do you have a sense from your organisation's perspective of places where potential employers can go to find those people?
Absolutely. Well, of course, I would say this, but we are one of those places. We work with 2,000 disadvantaged young people a year. And we're really encouraged to see an organisation called the 93% Club popping up at universities that you may have heard about. It's kind of the federalised approach to students' unions where other working class students can come together and talk about some of the challenges they face. And let me just give you some stats about that. 75% of the students we spoke to, when asked about the things they're most worried about in terms of their university experience, it's not fitting in. And that exceeds the number of people who were worried about COVID, and that's just 68%. So we know that these young people are really kind of conscious of their class, they're conscious of the unis they want to go to in the Russell Group, being dominated by middle class students. And overall, 85% of the young people we spoke to agree that others get ahead because of who they know. That is such a mind-blowingly huge number of people.
The 93% Club, just so I understand, if I rock up I've got my university place, I start there, and it's a self-selecting thing, is it? That I could turn up to the 93% Club, it's just like a sort of social society, if you like, and say, well, I'm like you in inverted commas, this is my background. Is that how it works?
I can't speak on behalf of the group, but that is my understanding of them. And I think it's a lot more than just a socialising thing as well. I do believe that they try and, focus on issues that might over-index if you're from a working class background in a middle class dominated society.
Super interesting. Thanks so much. And thank you very much for being here and for all the work that you do with us at Tortoise. We're all about getting younger voices into the newsroom and people from different backgrounds and stuff like that. So thank you very much for turning up. I want to just spend the last sort of 10 minutes or so talking about COVID third wave stuff. I spent some of the bank holiday weekend with a good friend of mine she's a nurse, a senior nurse in the intensive care unit, one of the big London hospitals. And she has briefed her staff last Friday to prepare for the third peak in August, and August into September. And she said that she has only 70% of her own staff, this is people who work in the intensive care unit, who have been vaccinated. So obviously they were all offered it. So she has a really good proportion, a third or so of people who have chosen not to. That includes all of the types of staff, nursing staff, I guess it includes clinical medical staff and housekeeping staff, food people, all the other people that work in hospitals. So 70% have and 30% haven't, which I could not believe. I was staggered. And of course, we've heard this morning, haven't we, about the rates of the vaccination rates, and you can go on the government website and find out vaccination rates in London particularly are still low. So it increasingly seems like third wave is an inevitability rather than a possibility. I wonder if we might hear from somebody on the SenseMaker team what they are thinking and hearing about this. I wonder, is Zav around maybe? Somebody from the SenseMaker team on Tortoise who wants to weigh in on this? Chris, what do you think? Chris Cook, you were at the SenseMaker today.
I did. So the big question, I mean, the big question about it strikes me that the argument about the emergence of variants is basically starting off the wrong way around, because there's massive asymmetry for the government in approaching this problem, which is to say that the potential downsides of the potential upside of delaying the further unlocking are incredibly big, and the potential downsides of delaying further unlocking are really small. Which is to say, like, the pubs are already open, the gyms are open, the schools are open. We're not talking about going back to March. We're talking about maybe undoing one or two of those little pieces, or maybe holding still for a few months. And in that sense, like, it strikes me as quite a good bet that they're probably going to delay in the face of the variants, because one of the things we know is that every week of delay brings more antibodies on stream, literally, as people who have been vaccinated build their immunity and people get vaccinated. So yeah, I'd be quite surprised if they don't delay from here, just because it does appear the Indian variant is more transmissible. It's outcompeting the other variants.
And do you think, with that in mind, if let's say the government takes a decision to delay the June 21st back for 4 weeks or however many weeks,
the English government, we should say, for the benefit of Andrew Girdwood in particular.
Do you think, though, that, Chris, then that that impossible question, that would be sufficient to avoid a third peak? It's peak rather than wave. That seems to be the language. I don't know quite what the difference is.
So I mean, there'll be as we unlock, you'd expect some increase in transmission from whatever it is at the moment. And the question is whether and I guess we shouldn't be trying to avoid that. We should be trying to keep it at a manageable, the lowest possible level. And that sort of feels like a semantic argument. But my point is, if we're talking about dealing with, 50 people being admitted to hospital, that's all within, those are small numbers. But I mean, we're never going. My point is, we're not going to be able to unlock in a way that avoids that. We're not going to get to zero COVID and then disperse it. So in a sense, what matters is the volume of cases, not the shape on a graph. I mean, I don't know if that answers your question.
Matt, what do you think? Are you there? Sorry, I forget. It takes you a couple of seconds to find them. Sorry, hey, Matt.
No,
You're in a completely different room than you were before.
Yeah, no, I've moved, several times during this thinking. You've got to be variant secure. I think Chris is right in the sense that sooner or later. Well, let me start again. I mean, I was out on Sunday night with my son at the movies in the centre of town, and this country is already lockdown is over. So the question now is really how we handle the what remains. Johnson's insistence is it be irreversible is politically understandable and epidemiologically nonsensical. Chris is right. It's clear that the Indian variant is more transmissible. So what matters now is getting jabs in arms, nothing more. And really, I can see them delaying the 21st date, although I'm it's quite clear from what Dominic Cummings said last week to the select committees that Boris Johnson is absolutely desperate to get out of lockdowns and always has been. And so it will take a huge deal of pressure, not just the occasional scientist saying, it should be postponed. So I would still bet on opening on June 21st.
Interesting. Gabby, what do you think? You've just had your jab this morning. Congratulations. Welcome.
Thank you. Feeling okay so far. See, I'm no expert on the subject, but there is a sense of inevitability about the cases increasing. I mean, people are certainly travelling around more. We've got more social contact, international travel. But as you say, there's still a big proportion of people that haven't been vaccinated. So, I'm an eternal optimist. But there is a sense that we will see cases rise. It feels like we need to get going again. Pubs are open, people are travelling, people are going on holiday. I don't know how much difference delaying it a little bit longer will make. Is there an argument that we sort of have to assume that we're going to keep having big proportions of people vaccinated before the 21st of June and then be in a better situation by then? It feels like for many businesses that are planning towards opening again on the 21st of June, the damage for them for not being able to may outweigh the benefits from keeping us locked down for a little bit longer. So,
Gurjinder, what do you think?
I thought with this level of vaccination, it wouldn't rise as quickly, but
it
seems like, like you say, a lot of people haven't vaccinated.
I just don't know we talked about vaccine hesitancy such a lot, didn't we, in the beginning part of the year. It was what I was thinking we did in the first week back in January about vaccine hesitancy and vaccine communication. And it is staggering to me that there are still people in risk groups. And that's the thing, the hospitalisations are people who tick multiple, one or multiple boxes in the high risk factors who still are saying they choosing no, and that's the thing that I worry that as and when the infection spread, which it is doing and will continue to do, it is those people who are going to bear the brunt. And I just don't know if we shrug our shoulders and just accept that as a risk. It just seems too high a factor. If you're choosing not to do it, what happens then? I just don't know.
What information have we got in terms of the people that have had their opportunity to be vaccinated and have not chosen to do it, from which specific groups they're falling into and what public campaigns for pro-vaccination have reached them? I mean, it could be something that we want to investigate potentially to drill into that a bit more and figure out.
Seems like James Wilson's seen some data on this. James, I know you're doing chat, but can you do two things at once?
Oof, that's a big ask, Liz.
It is a big ask.
So I just Googled it and I saw this it was actually on Fox, and it said that, and this is quite old. Oh no, it's not that old. It's from last month.
They're available, everyone.
But it said it's only from last month, but it said that government polling shows around 6% of people would say the vaccine. Which is lower than other countries, and 26% of Americans, for instance, said they wouldn't take the vaccine.
Yeah, I like Louise Jarvis's idea here, where it's like, we need vaccine centres. I can imagine a sort of painted pink, looks like an ice cream van, but with a injection on the side that goes and parks at Alton Towers and down by the beach. So you can kind of queue up to get your ice cream and have your jab at the same time. I think that's a genius idea. Let's put Louise Jarvis in control of the vaccine distribution. I don't think we quite know what's going to happen on the 21st of June. And I actually can't remember what happens. What do we get extra that we haven't got now?
So I mean, I live next to Borough Market, and if you go there at the weekend...
Oh, it's packed, but it has been throughout.
Yeah, but also, like, all along the South Bank, it's large groups of people. I got on the tube on Saturday evening, and half the people aren't wearing masks, and there's certainly no checks or fines or whatever being handed out. There's no staff there saying, put your mask on. And the people not wearing their masks are not doing it in a sort of subversive, like keeping their head down. I mean, they just don't care, and people aren't challenging them on it like members of the public aren't. There are large groups of people like sat on Clapham Common and things like that. So I sort of feel like a lot of people have checked out of the process. I think I certainly have.
Do you think those people that aren't wearing masks that are on the tube are also people that would choose to not be vaccinated? Like, what's the cross?
So,
like, I mean,
how do you know?
Right?
The person I was with was trying to give evils over their mask at two of the people who were unmasked and chatting about it, and we overheard them saying, "Oh well, I'm sure loads of other people on the tube have been vaccinated, so I don't care. We're all covered."
Interesting.
Right.
Do you know, as a parting thought on this, and not a particularly intelligent or helpful one, but because it's warm, properly warm for the first time now, coming in on the tube this morning with my mask on was a really challenging. I can envisage. Well, it just, you can't really breathe. I mean, and it wasn't busy at all because still people aren't really getting the tube that much. But that is going to be a real problem, I think, through when the carriages get busier. You know, it is really quite challenging. They used to say carry a water with you, but of course you can't drink water when you've got your mask on. So I think there are sort of, it seems like a small thing, but I think it will become increasingly problematic. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. We have hit the top of the hour. It's 2 o'clock. So we've covered a lot of ground. Thank you to everybody who, my small but perfectly formed in newsroom participants. And as always, thanks to everybody for joining from home. There's no thinking this evening, but we're back tomorrow evening talking about marriage and whether the fact that Bill and Melinda can't make it work, then what the hell hope have the rest of us got? Please do join us for that. Thanks so much. See you later.